Montana Territory, 1881. The stagecoach wheels snapped clean off the axle just as it crested the ridge into Dry Creek Valley, pitching Katherine Maeve Morgan forward into a stranger's lap with a sharp gasp and a jolt that rattled her bones. Her gloved hands clutched her trunk, her bonnet askew, heart hammering against her ribs like it still had a choice in the matter. She had come all this way from Ohio to Montana because of a letter, a promise of marriage. A man named Walter Bishop, a widower with a house and land, who had written that he needed a wife to help raise his 2 young children. Katherine had nothing left in Ohio. Her parents were gone, the bank had taken the house, and her younger sister had married into a family that made it clear Katherine was not welcome. So she packed her few belongings and answered the ad. She had not expected Walter to be older than he claimed, or for his eyes to be cold. She had not expected his daughter, Elsie, to flinch when he raised his voice, or for his son, Edwin, to already have a bruise on his arm. "You can come or go," Walter had said when she stood at his doorway that first night, "but I paid the fare and I expect work in return." He did not touch her, not in the way she feared, but he made it clear she was not wanted for love, only for labor. The children were quiet under his gaze, and she learned quickly not to speak unless spoken to. By the 3rd week, she had nearly convinced herself to endure it. For the children, for the roof over her head. Until the morning, Walter raised his hand to Edwin for dropping a milk pail, and Katherine stepped between them. He backhanded her so hard she saw stars. That night, she packed her things. The bruises on her cheek and ribs throbbed with every breath, but she wrapped her shawl tight and led the children out the back door into the dark. The sky was wide and moonless, and the wind carried the scent of snow. They walked for hours down the foothills, along the creek, until they saw the faint glow of lantern light at the edge of a fence line. The barn door opened before she could knock. A tall figure stepped out into the cold. He wore a worn coat, his hat pulled low, a rifle resting casual in one arm. The horses behind him stirred, and Katherine pushed the children closer behind her. "You lost?" the man asked, voice low, not unkind. "I need help," Katherine said, her voice rough from the cold. We left Bishop's homestead." The name made the man straighten. He stepped forward, light catching his face now. Dark hair, rough jaw, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. He glanced at the children, then at the bruises Katherine could not hide. "I am Porter Klein," he said. "Come inside." The warmth of his cabin nearly made her cry. He said little as he poured them hot water, set out bread and dried meat, and pulled blankets from a cedar chest. Edwin fell asleep first, curled in one corner of the rug. Elsie clung to Katherine's skirt until her eyes finally closed. Porter handed Katherine a tin cup and sat across from her. "You are not the first to run from that place," he said after a long silence. "You know him?" she asked, half afraid of the answer. "We used to ride fence together," Porter said. "Years back, I stopped when I saw how he treated his stock." Did not take long to figure he treated people worse. Katherine looked down into her cup. Her fingers trembled. "I thought he just needed help," she said. "I thought I could make a home." "You still can," Porter said, and then quieter, "just not with him." She looked up. He did not stare. He did not leer, he just looked at her like she was a person, like she mattered. The next morning, Porter rode out. He came back with her trunk tied behind his saddle. "I went up there at first light," he said. "He was not home, probably gone to town. I took what was yours." "You should not have," she whispered, but something in her chest eased. He shrugged. "You deserve better." She watched him help Edwin feed the horses, watched the way Elsie stayed close to him, her small hand curling into his coat like she had known him longer than a night. 2 days passed. Porter never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He showed her how to start the stove and offered her the room with the window facing east. When she tried to cook, he stood beside her and cleaned the potatoes without a word. On the 3rd day, he looked across the table at her and said, "You can stay as long as you need." Katherine held his gaze. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not," she nodded, throat tight. That night, she tucked the children into the bed Porter had given up for them, then stepped outside into the cold. He was on the porch, watching the dark roll over the hills. "I never wanted to marry for anything but love," she said quietly. Porter turned to her. "Then do not settle," he said. I almost did. He stepped down from the porch and stood in front of her, close but careful. You deserve better, he said, voice rough. You deserve someone who wants all of you, not what you can give. You deserve better me. Katherine swallowed. She should have been afraid. She was not. She reached up, touched the edge of his coat. You mean that? He nodded once. I have meant it since the moment you stepped through my barn door. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. And there, in the quiet Montana dark, with the wind soft around them and the children safe inside, Katherine let herself believe in something better. The spring melt came slowly, bleeding through the frozen earth and softening the ground around Porter's homestead. By mid-March, the snow thinned to patches beneath the cottonwoods, and the creek behind the barn lifted its voice, rushing louder each day as ice turned to water and flowed free. Katherine had begun rising early, not out of duty but restlessness. She began taking a broom to the porch before the sun cleared the hills, sweeping away the grit that the wind brought in. It wasn't necessity that moved her hands, but the comfort of rhythm, the quiet satisfaction of making a place feel lived in, Porter had noticed. He never said as much, but he sharpened her kitchen knife without asking and left a small wooden box on the shelf above the stove nails and a hammer inside, the top smoothed and sanded like it was meant for her palms. One morning, as he returned from checking the cattle, he paused at the threshold, watching her mend a torn sleeve of Edwin's shirt by the hearth. I've been meaning to ask, he said, setting his gloves on the windowsill. Did you ever learn to ride? She looked up from her stitching. We had a gray mare when I was a girl, docile enough for a child, but I was never allowed to ride far. My father thought the world too dangerous. It is, Porter agreed, easing down onto the bench near the fire. But it's a different sort of danger when you know how to move through it. She threaded the needle again, her voice quieter. I'd like to learn, he nodded, rubbing a hand along his jaw. We'll start with Dusty, she's steady. Won't spook easy. That afternoon, Katherine stood at the edge of the corral, skirts tucked up and boots firm in the dirt. Dusty, a broad-backed dun mare with a patient eye, stood saddled and still, Porter holding the reins loosely and waiting until Katherine stepped forward on her own. He offered no instruction until she asked. When she hesitated at the stirrup, he showed her how to place her foot and shift her weight. His hands never lingered, his presence steady but distant enough to let her find her confidence. I didn't think I'd ever have the chance, she said once she was seated, reins in hand, the mare calm beneath her. You've got the seat for it, he said, walking beside her as she nudged Dusty into a slow walk. And the spine. She flushed, but didn't shy from his words. Each day after, she rode a little longer circles at first, then along the fence line, and eventually out past the ridge where the land opened wide and the wind smelled of pine. She rode alone once, just to the edge of the valley and back, and Porter said nothing when she returned, only handed her a tin of cold beans and sat beside her on the porch. One evening, while Katherine chopped onions for stew, Elsie came into the kitchen with a scrap of folded paper in her hand. I drew this, the girl said, pushing it toward her. It was a picture child's charcoal and rough lines, but clear enough. A house with smoke curling from the chimney. A woman with long hair, a man in a wide hat, 2 children holding hands. Katherine blinked, throat tightening. Did you draw this today? She asked. Elsie nodded. It's us, you and Porter and me and Edwin. Katherine folded the paper gently and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the stew pot had cooled, she stepped out onto the porch where Porter leaned against the post, pipe unlit in one hand. I didn't expect to stay this long, she said. He didn't look at her. I didn't expect to want you to. She came to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth through the night air. I'm not a woman with much to offer, she said. No money, no land, just what's left of me. He turned then, eyes catching hers in the dark. You've got more than most, he said. You stayed kind, that's worth something. The silence stretched between them, easy and full. I wouldn't be a burden, she asked, not if I stayed for good. He shook his head slowly, voice low. You'd be the reason I kept going. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. The calluses were rough, but his grip was careful, like he understood exactly how much she'd had to endure before she found her way to this porch. They stood like that a long while, fingers laced, as the wind shifted through the hills and the stars came out one by one. By late April, the cottonwood buds had split open, and the creek behind the barn ran clear, no longer thick with snowmelt. Katherine stood at the edge of the pasture, elbows resting on the top rail, watching Elsie gather wild violets near the fence line. Edwin was farther out, crouched low, poking gently at a turtle that had wandered too near the water's edge. Porter was behind her, mending a harness strap with quiet focus, the leather stretched between his knees. He had not said much that morning, but his nearness gave her a peace she hadn't known she could feel again. She glanced back. "You've kept this place with care," she said, "even through winter." He didn't look up. "Didn't always. Let half the barn rot 1 year after my father passed. Couldn't bring myself to patch a roof when everything felt like it was slipping through my hands." She stepped closer, brushing her fingers over the repaired edge of the strap. "What changed?" Porter's jaw tightened slightly. "One spring I found a foal near starved. Mare had died in the storm. I fed it every day with a rag dipped in milk. Watched it stand on legs too thin for its weight. Figured if it could keep trying, so could I." She nodded, letting his words settle. Later that evening, as the air cooled and the last of the light turned the grass gold, Katherine ladled stew into bowls while the children sat cross-legged with a slate and chalk, drawing letters she'd begun teaching them. Edwin furrowed his brow as he copied an uppercase G, lips moving silently. Elsie traced over her brother's lines with immense concentration. Porter sat near the window, boots off, one foot resting on the edge of the woodbox. He watched the children for a long moment before speaking. "They've settled," he said. "Like they belong." Katherine turned from the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "Children know when they're safe," she said. "It's not something you can teach, it's something they feel." He tilted his head slightly, then looked at her. "And you, do you feel safe?" She met his gaze. "I do." He stood and crossed the room with slow steps, stopping only when he was close enough that she could feel the heat from his skin. "I've been thinking on something," he said. "Something I should have said sooner." Her breath caught, but she kept her eyes steady. "I didn't offer you a place here out of pity," he said. "It's more than that now. It's become more than I expected." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table. "I knew it the first time you brought Edwin in from the cold," he continued. "The way you looked at him, like he was worth the world. No one's ever looked at me that way, but I reckon I'd like to know what it feels like." She stepped forward then, voice soft. "You already do, you just haven't let yourself believe it." Porter's throat moved as he swallowed. "I don't have fine words. I don't know how to ask the way a man should." "You already have," she said, reaching up to touch his chest just over his heart. "Every time you saw me without flinching, every time you gave the children something to hope for." He covered her hand with his own. "I want you here," he said. "Not just for a while, not just until you find somewhere else. I want you here because this place is better with you in it." Katherine nodded slowly, tears gathering but not falling. "I don't want to go anywhere else," she said. "Not ever again." That night, after the children were asleep beneath quilts she had stitched in quiet hours by the hearth, Katherine stepped out onto the porch. The moon was low, silvering the tops of the grass. Porter stood near the hitch rail, coat draped across one shoulder. She joined him without a word, slipping her hand into his. It fit easily. He didn't speak right away, just brought her fingers to his lips and kissed them, slow and sure. "We'll build something," he said quietly. "Something that lasts." She leaned into him, the scent of pine and smoke in his coat, and whispered, "We already have." The first real warmth came in May, not just in the air, but in the soil, the kind of warmth that made seeds push upward and hands itch for planting. Katherine stood at the edge of what would become the garden. Sleeves rolled past her elbows, a row of onion sets waiting in a shallow clay basin. Porter was down by the shed, cutting slats for a new chicken run, his shirt damp at the back from the morning's labor. She pressed her fingers into the tilled soil, the dark earth crumbling soft and rich beneath her nails. She hadn't planted anything since her mother's kitchen garden behind the clapboard house in Zanesville. That had been long ago, before the war ended, before the world went quiet around her. Edwin knelt beside her, palm cupped around a seedling. "Do I cover it all the way, just enough to tuck it in?" she said. "So it doesn't feel lost." He nodded solemnly and lowered the seedling like it was something sacred. Elsie sat nearby on a quilt, winding twine around the handle of a basket. Her tongue poked slightly between her teeth in concentration, and she didn't look up when Porter approached. "Fence'll hold another season," he said, setting down a coil of wire near the barn wall. "But I'll need to trade for more posts before summer's through." Katherine dusted her hands on her skirt. "What do you trade with?" "Beef, mostly. Sometimes leather if I've got scraps clean enough." He squinted toward the northern ridge. "There's a family up near Little Elk Creek that takes to bartering. They've got milk goats and a son who makes fine tools." She reached for another onion set. "You've known them long, since I came off the trail. The father's Choctaw, married a woman from Kentucky. They keep to themselves, but they're fair." The quiet settled again, filled only by the rustle of wind in the new grass and the soft clink of Edwin's trowel. Later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the field, Porter came into the cabin carrying a cedar box with a leather strap fixed to one side. He set it on the table, then opened it slowly. Inside lay a worn Bible, a small tin of matches, and a folded square of blue calico. Beneath that, nestled in the corner, was a ring silver, plain but polished with care. "I've had this a long while," he said. "My father bought it off a traveling smith before he passed. Meant for my mother, but she never wore jewelry." Katherine looked at the ring, then up at him. "Why show me this now?" he swallowed, not nervous but careful. "Because I'd like you to wear it, if you want to." She reached in and lifted the ring gently. It was cool and heavier than she expected. "I'm not asking for ceremony," he added, "just truth. If you feel the same." Katherine turned the ring between her fingers. "I never thought I'd be asked with gentleness," she said, "or with room to say no." "I'd wait if you needed time," he said. She slid the ring onto her finger. It caught the light where the fire crackled low behind him. "I don't," she said. That night, when the children were asleep and the wind had quieted, they sat outside together on the porch steps, knees touching. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. Porter nodded once. "So have I. I'd like to build a proper garden," she continued. "Not just onions, maybe beans, squash, something that lasts through the season. I'll clear more ground for you," he said, "and I'd like to teach Elsie her letters properly. She's bright. She just needs steadiness." "You've got that to give," he said. "And you?" she asked, turning to him. His voice was rough in the still. "I want to come home each day and know I've got someone waiting. I want to see you across this porch for the rest of my life." She leaned into his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. "You will," she said. "You already do." In the dark, they didn't speak again, but the silence between them was full of something new, not longing, not fear, not even hope. It was belonging, hard-earned and true. Porter shifted the last of the firewood under the eaves, brushing bark dust from his palms. The morning had broken warm, with still air and the faint scent of sage drifting up from the flats. A single raven crossed overhead, silent wings cutting against the pale blue sky. Katherine had taken the children down to the far edge of the property, where the creek bent shallow and smooth around a bed of flat stones. She'd packed bread and boiled eggs in a cloth sack and kissed his cheek before they left, quick and certain. He stood there a moment longer, watching the distant figures disappear behind the rise, then went inside. The cabin was quiet without them, the kind of quiet that once would have made him restless. Now it only made him aware of their absence, how the space breathed differently when Katherine wasn't in it. He crossed the room and opened the drawer beneath the dry sink, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. His handwriting was uneven, but careful. He'd been drafting the deed transfer for weeks, unsure how or when to offer it. Half the land in her name. He'd already spoken to the circuit clerk in town. All it needed was her mark beside his. He left it on the table and stepped back outside, saddle slung over one shoulder. The horses needed a stretch, and he wanted to ride the southern fence before the rains came. By the time he returned, the wind had picked up, and the sky had turned the color of river stone. Rain came slow and steady, soaking the porch steps and running in thin rivulets down the sides of the cabin. Katherine was in the kitchen, sleeves damp, hair curling at her temples. She had flour on her hands and a bowl of dough resting beneath a cloth. "Where are the children?" Porter asked, setting his hat on the peg. "Upstairs, drying off. Edwin found a turtle with a cracked shell. Elsie's dressing it with moss and string, swears it'll heal. He smiled, easing down onto the bench by the hearth. And you, find anything worth bringing back. She wiped her hands on the cloth and crossed the room. Just this, she said, laying a sprig of wild mint on the table. Thought it might go well in tea. He reached out and turned the stem gently between his fingers. You've made this place better than I ever managed on my own. I didn't come to fix anything, she said. I came to build something new. Porter's gaze drifted to the folded paper still sitting untouched beside the mint. Katherine followed his glance. What's that? He didn't answer at once, just pushed it toward her. She unfolded it slowly, reading in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were steady. You don't have to give me land. I'm not giving it, he said. I'm sharing it. This place is as much yours now as mine. I just wanted to say so. She set the paper down carefully, pressing a hand flat to its corner. Then let's make it official. He reached for the inkwell and pen, and she signed beside his name with a firm hand. That night, rain still whispering against the windows, they stood together in the upstairs room, watching the children sleep. Elsie had made a nest of blankets for the wounded turtle near the hearth, its shell half wrapped in muslin. Edwin's foot stuck out from the bottom of the quilt, pale and muddy. They're already more sure of themselves, Katherine said, even Edwin. He speaks louder now. Porter rested a hand on the doorframe. That's your doing, she turned to him. No, it's ours. He stepped behind her, arms slipping around her waist, his chin resting lightly against her temple. She leaned into him, and they stood that way until the chill drove them back to the fire. Later, as they lay in bed, the windows fogged and the lantern low, Katherine traced her fingers along the edge of his arm where an old scar curved beneath the skin. Do you ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Not anymore, she nodded, then whispered. I never thought I'd feel like I belonged anywhere again. Porter kissed her shoulder, slow and certain. You belong here. With me? They woke the next morning to sun spilling across the floorboards, warm and golden. The children's laughter drifted in from outside, Elsie chasing Edwin around the barn, the turtle forgotten for now. Katherine stood at the doorway, apron tied at her waist, hair pinned loosely at her nape. Porter came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her middle. I was thinking, she said, we should plant corn next year, maybe make room for one more row. He kissed the curve of her neck. We'll plant whatever you want, we've got the time. Years passed. The house grew, room by room, first a root cellar, then a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. The children grew tall and sure, with sun-dark hair and steady hands. Edwin built a coop with his own hammer and sold eggs to the trading post. Elsie kept a ledger of every penny earned. The turtle lived 3 more summers. Katherine and Porter never left the valley. They didn't need to. The land held them, the seasons turning sure and slow. They built their days with quiet joy, shared work, soft laughter, and a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. And when the years had worn their hair silver and their hands stiff, they still found each other each night, side by side, hearts full, together always.